Today, we are discussing the 2025 wide receiver class in our tiers, what order we have them in, and this is right before the combine here. Things might change a little bit, but this is where we are at now. Stick around for all that and more. Hello, and welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. My name is JP, and I'm joined here with just David today. Our schedules didn't quite line up to have Justin with us today, but we will get him back in here shortly. How are you doing lately, David?
I'm doing all right. Kind of an eventful week last week. I unexpectedly adopted a dog. So he's a little dog. He's on my lap right now. He might pop in frame, but I will definitely be looking around like this while recording. So just a warning. I'm not going crazy. I'm just keeping an eye on my new dog. How about you, buddy? How are things?
Yeah, no, I mean, I get it. When you first get the dog, you gotta have your eye on him. I totally get that, man. I got two myself, and I love mine. We are a dog friendly show, that's for sure.
Absolutely, man. I love dogs.
They're the best, just like tier one wide receivers,
Tier one dogs, tier one wide receivers. Let's go.
right? Yeah, and our first tier here, we only have one prospect, and you can probably guess who it is, and that's Tedero McMillan from Arizona. Everybody knows that this is a big hulking wide receiver. He's long. He's not a slow mover though. He's able to get in and out of his breaks pretty quickly, like a guy that's maybe 195, 200 pounds as opposed to 210 plus. And he's 6 foot four. He's a rangy guy. He's got really, really good hands. He can make these one-handed catches. His quarterback play was not that good this year, and he had to adjust to a lot of balls. And we've seen that he can do it. I've seen this one video circulate around the internet where he's catching it one-handed behind it, going behind his back between his legs or something. It's just guy's really good athletically, and I think he could be a guy that might be able to be a top 15 receiver as a rookie, but that's going to depend on landing spot.
Yeah, always landing spot's important when we're talking just positional finish. Love somewhere where he could be the number one with a good young quarterback, good coach. Probably going to get picked early. Probably not going to get all of those things just because of that. Good teams don't normally pick early. But, something like Carolina would be a lot of fun. I've seen some mocks where he falls to some unexpected spots like Seattle and Tampa Bay. Those are really interesting to me. I think the Seattle one they mentioned, they were anticipating a DK trade. As far as year one prospects, it's going to be interesting to see where he lands. But long term, we got to love this guy. Like you said, he's huge. He can move well. I think he was breaking tackles around a similar rate as Malik Neighbors did last year. And that's kind of what Malik Neighbors was known for. We've seen what he can do in the NFL. So wheels up on Tech. Got to love him. He's locked in at my 102 right now. That definitely could change, but I would bet on it not changing if I'm being honest. I think he'll probably stay there. You agree 102 right now?
Yes, that's where I have him as well. I don't feel as good about the quarterbacks. Hampton's kind of in that mix, but it's tough to prop him up above Ted at this point. But yeah, I've seen quite a wide range for him in the NFL drafts. Some people think that he's going to fall to, like you said, 18, 19, which I don't think he's going to fall quite that low, but I guess it's possible. I've heard discussions that maybe he's more of the prospect of like Chris Olave caliber, Drake London, somewhere in that atmosphere as opposed to, the neighbors and Marvin. I think we probably agree roughly with that kind of assessment. He could go to the Jets at 7 potentially. Oh, they've really only got Garrett Wilson and Malachi Corley if Devontae Adams and Alan Lazard and all the Aaron Rodgers bros are out of town. I don't know. That's at least somewhat interesting. I'd rather him not go to the Jets or the Cowboys where they already have an alpha kind of number one receiver caliber player like Wilson and Lamb there, but it wouldn't be terrible. But I definitely would prefer something like you said, the Panthers or the Patriots. I think those are interesting where he could be the number one there.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Would definitely not like the Jets who's throwing him the ball, at least in Dallas, if you got Dak there. So either way, Tet is a beast. We're going to be happy to roster him where we have the chance to. Let's go ahead and jump into tier two. We've got Luther Burden and Emeka Egbuka, just a two-man tier here. Looking at these two guys, to me, I see a very high ceiling in Burden and a very high floor in Egbuka. But other than that, they're pretty similar. Like, going to be slot guys, get the ball in their hands, probably play some flanker too and be all right. Not sure if either can survive as an X for extended periods of times. Maybe they can develop that part of their game. But definitely excited about these two guys, and I think it'll be very landing spot dependent for who I have higher personally.
Yeah, these guys. They're similar in size. I think Burton, he's a little bit thicker, but they're both right around 6 foot, 200 ish to 210 pounds. But I think they're just so different with the way that they win. Like Buka, he's not really a missed tackles force guy. With his career missed tackles force per attempt is 0.18, where Burton is 0.35, so twice as effective as a tackle breaker. I mean, I think Burton, he had, let's see, it's 61 receptions this year and still had, I think I saw his 30 missed tackles. So literally every other catch, he's forcing a missed tackle. Maybe that's including his carries as well, which he did have 9. But I mean, that just speaks to the kind of athlete and ability that he has with the ball in his hands. I think Igbuka, like you said, is safer. I think he's just a professional wide receiver. He's just a pro's pro. He's a technician kind of guy who, on third down, you frequently saw Ohio State go to him because they knew that they could rely on him. Like I said, not going to create a ton after the catch, I don't think. But I heard that he's one of the best blockers in the draft class too. So if he's in the slot, that's an underrated thing that helps a run game. I think some teams like the Sean McVay team, Kyle Shanahan, one of the Shanahan trees.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it there with the Shanahan tree guy. I was going to say as a replacement for Cup, like Buka would be pretty much perfect. I think there's several other spots we'd like to. I'd love to see him in Houston reunited with CJ Stroud. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
And like you said, one of the biggest differences is Burden is elite with the ball in his hands. You heard those missed tackles, force per attempt rates. It's not like Egbuka was bad. His numbers probably a little below average for receivers of this caliber, but it's not bad. Burden's is just so elite. So yeah, if we get Egbuka in the right system, I'll probably have him wide receiver too. But if we don't, and Burden is just somewhere he's going to have opportunity, it's gonna be awfully hard for me to draft Egbuka over Bird. Normally, early in these drafts, we are swinging for the fences. We're looking for that upside.
yeah. I think landing spot draft capital will kind of dictate that, but I think there's probably a 70 to 75% chance I got Burden above Igbuka because of the upside. He's a year younger coming out as well. But yeah, I mean, both guys I'm looking at 2024, they both were 80 plus percent snaps in the slot. I think they are capable of giving some as a flanker, but they haven't proved it quite as much as you'd want to see. But that's not to say that it can't win on the outside for sure. I mean, Justin Jefferson was a 90% slot guy coming out of college. Not that they're going to be Justin Jefferson. I highly doubt that. But they're both rock solid wide receivers who are at least first round worthy. I think both probably do make it into the first round. It could be towards the back half. And I mean, honestly, it could be as high as 18, 19, 20 range.
Yeah, and Burden did play some outside as a true freshman. It was a much smaller sample size than his sophomore and junior years, but he did look good. So that gives me some hope there. And Egbuka, if you look at his college teammates, he might have played with the best group of college wide receivers of any other wide receiver ever. When he was with Olave, Wilson, Jason, Marv, now Jeremiah Smith, just elite players playing on the outside next to him. I don't really think Igbuka is going to live outside, but he never really was needed outside at Ohio State. So maybe there's something there. These two guys are both great playmakers, going to be good in the slot, going to get open, like you said, do it in different ways. But they're both going to be pretty important cogs to their offense.
I just think that these guys probably are more as high end wide receiver twos on an NFL team. Think they could be low end ones passable, but I think that's probably why we're a little bit lower on this class. Are you kind of similar in that thoughts, or do you think Burton's more of a one?
I think Burden has a decent shot to be a one. He would need the right system and the right offensive coordinator. I think both would do better as a two for real football. Obviously, in fantasy, we prefer them to be the first read all the time, but I think they'll both succeed as a second receiver. I think, in that like Devonta Smith, T. Higgins career range of where they'll be for value wise. But I do think Burden has a shot just because that upside, that playmaking ability is so elite.
Yeah, I think he could be 105 in this draft. In the rookie drafts, he could be as low as 110, 111. I think Ibuka's similar, but maybe a slot or two behind that.
Yep, I agree there.
Let's go ahead and jump into our tier three here then. So we got 3 players here. We got Matthew Golden, Trey Harris, and Travis Hunter. This is a really interesting group here. I mean, Travis Hunter, I know a lot of people probably have him higher. It's just really tough if you're not going to be an 80 plus percent snap player at wide receiver. If you're playing 50%, even if you're top 10 in yards per route run, you're still not going to be a top 15 wide receiver in fantasy. I think he could be. I mean, his movement skills are elite. His ball skills, instincts. he just has such a high ceiling. He would be probably 102, 103 if he committed full time to wide receiver. If the team that drafted him said, look, he's going to be wide receiver, not cornerback, he's probably going to be 50-50. He has been adamant himself that I'm going to play both. I heard he's going to do both drills at the combine, but I guess he's listed at cornerback, which makes you, I don't know, not off of him, but it just makes you more nervous that he's listed as a corner.
Yeah, this is a hard one to track. It's going to be a go with your gut situation. I think is the best advice to give. Look, if we thought he was going to be a receiver full time, I think we both agree he'd be tier one and he'd be in conversation for wide receiver one overall. That's the kind of skill he has. But like you said, if he's playing full time corner and only getting in some packages on offense, like playing 50% of that, it's gonna be really hard to warrant even rostering him, better yet, ever starting him. So that's gonna be the real issue there. I do think, like you said, he's listed at corner at the combine. I've got kind of a theory on that. I have absolutely no information, and it could be complete bullshit that I'm saying right now. But it seems to me like it might make sense if he's like, okay, spend the time preparing for the combine as a corner, test as a corner, all that. And then we've got a couple more weeks in between combine and your pro day. We'll switch there. Then you work for a couple weeks on your wide receiver drills. We'll showcase your wide receiver drills at the pro day. Pro day, you got Shador Sanders throwing you the ball at combine. You just got random quarterbacks throwing you the ball. So it makes sense to go in that order if you're trying to showcase both skill sets. But yeah, it's something we got to monitor. It's something right now we have them in tier three because we're ranking these guys. Well, we're tiering them with the information we have today. So if we were to draft, like start a draft right now, this is about how we would have it. If it gets closer and we find out, hey, he's definitely a corner. He's only going to play a few plays on offense. He probably drops. Whereas the other way around, if we find out, hey, whoever drafts him wants him to be a receiver, then like I said, he goes up probably into tier one.
Which I tweeted this out. I think it might have been about a month ago, where there was a poll for NFL insiders, and I think the results showed it was 75% of them believe that he would be a cornerback in the next level. So when you're leaning more that direction, there is that risk. If he's playing only a few snaps, if he's playing 5 to 10 snaps on offense, that's about worthless for us. Honestly, it really is. Unless you're playing best ball and he gets a touchdown, you're not going to know when to start him if he's barely playing. He's not startable in that scenario. Like we said, he's got a lot of upside, and it's not just based on what we see on the film. It's the production as well. He had 16 total touchdowns, almost 100 receptions with 1,200 yards. So, and that's as a junior when he's still playing cornerback. It's absurd. I mean, this is the Heisman winner, and he was that for a reason. So, man, I think in the early second round, like you said, with the information we have today, early second is where I'd be comfortable taking him. Maybe 201, 202 in that range. But I think you said you prefer the other guys in this tier. Is that true?
Yeah, I think for right now, push come to shove, most teams I would draft the other two guys that we're about to talk about. That's just because I know they're going to play wide receiver at the NFL level. But I think certain teams, whether it be like a competitor where I just have a couple extra assets I can afford to miss on an early second, I would take Hunter over these guys. Or if I'm in such a deep rebuild that I don't have assets and I kind of need a hit on a home run or two, I'll probably take Hunter there just for the upside swing. But pretty much every team in between those two extremes, I'm going to take these other two guys. I'll talk about my guy here. I'll let you talk about your guy. I know who you prefer. I like both of them. I'm not trying to say that I prefer Harris to Golden. I think they're pretty even right now for me. Trey Harris is just he was on pace for having a similar wide receiver season to what JNT did at running back or Harold Fannin did at tight end, right? He had over 5 yards per out run, which I don't know how far this goes back, but I heard a guy on a PFF podcast say that was their record. So the most yards per out run in a single season for anyone that they have data on. Which I don't think it goes back like decades and decades, but I think it goes back a little while at least. So that's definitely saying something. He's a big guy. I think he can play outside. He might be better as a slot receiver. That's going to be for film guys to decide, not me. But he's big. He's probably not going to run. I would guess like low 4.5s personally, but he's got really good instincts and really good pacing where he can still get open down the field. I saw someone compare him to Jordy Nelson. Huge Jordy Nelson fan myself. I think what that says to me is that like Jordy was never elite speed, but when you watched him play, his game speed was elite. And that was because of the instincts he had. I think Trey Harris has at least some of that. And on top of all that, he was the highest graded pass or run blocker from this receiving class. So kind of like what we were talking about with like Buka, he's going to find a role to stay on the field, which is good for fantasy.
think we're more of a run blocking pod than most.
Being on the field is important.
Yeah, I mean, if you're getting 75% snaps versus, 55, 60, that's going to give you more opportunity. It's going to give more versatility, especially like we said, those Shanahan guys. They like to keep the defense on their toes, not know if they're going to run or pass. Like that's one of the biggest things. I know Matt LaFleur, he loves to do that. You
Absolutely.
think they're going to throw it, and nope, I'm going to run it again for the 10th time in a row sometimes. So
Yep, and they love those plays to look identical too, which is why you want those run blockers at receiver on in those schemes.
yeah, oh yeah, and that's how you create explosive plays. Honestly, you can turn a 15-yard run into a 41 if your receivers are blocking. So definitely is important. Not as some people might hear us talking about run blocking and be like, oh, well, I don't care. Well, yeah, I think it matters to some degree for sure. But I recently saw Trey Harris versus LSU SEC competition there. It was all of his catches, and I was pretty surprised with just the burst that he had out of his catch. Immediately, he catches the ball and turned into a runner and was like making guys miss, creating big plays. And I didn't think he was quite that athletic, but honestly, that kind of surprised me. And I've started to rise on him a little bit more. I was a little bit lower on him, but no, I think he has as much upside as almost Ted McMillan. Maybe not as much as Travis Hunter, in my opinion. But shoot, the yards per route run, the size. I know he's a little bit older, but I think he's got a lot of upside. I know that film guys are a little bit split on him. Some people think he's more of a early third, but some people think he's a late first. So I think he's probably going to be in that round two range. If he gets a good landing spot, it's going to be really, really interesting. He could be somebody that produces right away. But the guy that we haven't talked about yet is Matthew Golden. I've heard a lot of buzz around him as being a round one wide receiver. I mean, Daniel Jeremiah has him as his wide receiver two. I remember early on, I was pining on Twitter like 2 months ago, like, why is Isaiah Bond ranked over Matthew Golden? This makes no sense to me. He has twice as much production as him. They're both juniors on the same team. Man, I saw him be wide receiver two on Daniel Jeremiah's board, and ever since then, I feel like people have kind of come around. And I guess maybe they hadn't seen the film on him yet, but this guy, he gets open down the field. He's not huge. He's kind of around that 6 foot, 6'1" range where I kind of like my receivers to be like the Garrett Wilson, Justin Jefferson, that kind of size where you're still quick, but you have enough size to win contested balls. But his ball skills, that's where something that people rave about. They're like, he's not 6'3", 6'4", but he goes up and wins those jump balls a lot. I mean, the first game of the season, when he was just getting acquainted with the team, he caught 2 touchdowns. He only had 3 catches, but he had 2 touchdowns. And I think that's what they saw right away was, oh, this guy, he's going to win the ball in tight quarters. He actually played with Tank Dell at Houston in his freshman season. He had 584 yards as a freshman, 7 touchdowns. That's pretty darn good. So right off the bat, I don't think that's quite qualifying for breakout age, but it's pretty close. And his breakout age would be super, super young if it did qualify. His second year, he got hurt. He only had 400 yards. He was just struggling with injuries, and that's why he transferred. And he became the alpha, especially down the stretch. He was the clear cut go to guy. I think he's somebody that has upside to be a one if he does hit his high end outcomes because I think he's quick. I hear a lot of people compare him to kind of like Stephon Diggs, where he's not like a burner, but a guy that's going to win down the field, can win on slants. I really, really like this player, and if he does go round one, especially to a good landing spot that we like, man, I saw him mocked to the Bills, and they kind of a crowded room. But if he established himself as the one with Josh Allen, like that would be super interesting. I think there's a lot of interesting spots if I pull up the draft board. Like the Texans, I think playing alongside Nico Collins, that'd be kind of interesting. It's insane that they haven't need a wide receiver after having Diggs and then Dell go down with injury. It's just crazy to me. But even like the Commanders, I think that's interesting as well. I mean, shoot, the Chiefs, we always talk about that. I think it's still somewhat interesting, but Rice and Worthy, not as much so. But I don't know. I almost think that this tier has as much upside as tier two in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I can see what you're saying there. I do like the guys in tier two a little more, but Travis Hunter's kind of a wild card sitting here in this tier because his upside is ridiculous. I think it's kind of funny with the Texas wide receivers. The last 2 years we've had at least the narrative that it's a speed guy versus the other guy or something. Like, didn't AD run in the 4.3s? I kind of think Golden's got a chance to do that, if not at least low 4.4s probably. It's not like he's slow at all. He's pretty fast too. I think he could be a complete receiver. I think, like you said, he could be a one if he hits his high end outcome. Definitely excited about it. Man, yeah, if he gets in the right spot, he could definitely cement himself in the first round of our rookie mocks. I kind of think Harris will have a harder time of being a first round rookie pick than Golden, but I think they both have a chance.
Yeah, I think you're saying that based on the fact that Golden's coming out after his junior year and Trey Harris is after his fifth year. But Trey Harris, he's still not super old. He's not like a 24-year-old coming out. I think he's about to turn 23. But I think that's fair because I think Golden could maybe get to the 112, but probably early second, like I've said about Travis Hunter. I think the same thing about Trey Harris. They're probably the 201 to 205, somewhere in that range today for me.
I think that's fair. I do think Dart is a wild card here if he ends up going, which, by the way, we'll be talking quarterback tiers. We'll be releasing that video a few days after this one, so do check it out. But yeah, if Dart ends up going late first, early second to a good spot, then he'll probably push both of those guys down a slot. How do these running backs sort out? There's still a lot of questions to be answered, but I do think Golden has a shot at being in that 110 to 112 range.
But moving on to our fourth tier here, we've got three players again here. We've got Alec Ayamanor, Jaden Higgins, and Jack Betch. Beck. I
Sure.
don't know how to pronounce it
I've
yet.
heard I've
We're
heard
gonna
it pronounced a couple of ways. I
I
think it's
have, yeah,
Besh, but I don't.
Besh. I think that's what I've most recently heard. We'll go with Besh. But go ahead and talk about Jack Besh because he's been a Senior Bowl riser. He was the MVP of the Senior Bowl and had the game-winning touchdown.
Yeah, had a great week at the Senior Bowl. Like you said, the Senior Bowl MVP, but not only during the game, during the whole week of practice, you hear good things about how he looked. He is a fourth year guy and he only has 1 year of good production, which is always a red flag. Something to be concerned about, don't get me wrong. But when we were looking a little deeper into this, we noticed his freshman year was at LSU. He led the team in receptions. That team had sophomore Kayshawn Booty, who I know he didn't turn out in the NFL the way we thought, but there was a time where we were like, "Oh, this guy's the next, surefire first round LSU wide receiver." There was a true freshman, Malik Neighbors, true freshman Brian Thomas Jr., and I forget what year, but Trey Palmer was also in that room. So four guys that have made it to the NFL field. Pretty impressive to lead that group as a true freshman in receptions. So he's 6'2", like a little under 220, I think, but like in the 210 range. He's also an excellent blocker. I think he'd be a much cheaper option to replace Cup for the Rams than Igbuka. But someone like that, I think they'd really like. The way he's been rising lately, I've seen him in a ton of second rounds of mock drafts, ton of top 50 picks, even. Those are things we like to see. And after those top six guys, we kind of get a little shaky. So I'll lean into a good Senior Bowl performance with some other outlying things that we like to see.
Yeah, talk about another wide receiver blocker. It's Jack Besh. And I heard that coming out of high school, there was a chance that they're considering playing him at tight end versus wide receiver just as a prospect. Sometimes players just change positions. I can't remember what he played in high school, but he would have been kind of a small tight end, a little bit of a bigger wide receiver. But yeah, I guess because of that tight end thought that that translates to him being a good blocker as well. So I think that'll help. Like we said with those Shanahan guys, I think I've actually connected that same thought with the Rams in my head because they might not want to spend round one capital. I don't think they have really recently, but the later rounds they've been taking shots at wide receivers every single year with Tutu and Puka. Cup was a day two pick. Yeah, I could see him being a target if they have that hole still when we're heading into the day two of the NFL draft. Jaden Higgins, he's the guy that I really, really like. I've thought that he could be like a top 40 pick. Lately, it seems like he's lost a little bit of steam, but he had almost 1,200 yards this season. He had 87 receptions, 1,183 yards, and 9 touchdowns. And he was 9 yards behind Jalen Noel, but that's pretty much because Jaden Higgins didn't play the last game of the season. He just passed him in that last game. I think Noel, his teammate, I heard that he was one of the three most impressive wide receivers at the Senior Bowl as well. I think he's probably going to go day two, maybe more like round three. Could be a round four guy. But looking back on 2023, Higgins had almost 1,000 yards that season as well with 6 touchdowns. But I really, really like his size. He's kind of that prototypical X wide receiver. He's listed at 6'4", 215. It's like the exact same size as Nico Collins if he does measure in at that size. And I've heard that he's actually a pretty darn good route runner as well. Gets in and out of his breaks well. He did get some steam day two of the Senior Bowl. Or day one. didn't hear much about him. Jalen Noel kind of stole the show there. But that kind of makes sense because Noel's the 5'9", 5'10" wide receiver. They're kind of quicker. We saw Tez Johnson got a love too. It's just those smaller guys. They typically get a little bit more buzz because the one on ones they kind of have a little bit of an edge there, just getting in and out of breaks. But yeah, I've heard a lot of people that have Jaden Higgins as wide receiver 6, 7 in that range. And I think he could be there because, like I said, he's got the production, he's got the size. His career yards per route run is top 5 in this class as well. So I think there's a lot of signals that he could be a really good player.
Definitely a lot to like statistically as you outlined there. I think the biggest thing for him is that size. There's some size above him. Ted McMillan's obviously big. Trey Harris, I think 6'2". Other than that, we've got a lot of 6'1" guys. I mean, Beck, I just said is 6'2", but I think he's going to play more inside. So if you're looking for an X receiver, Higgins is probably your best like cheap bet. Definitely interested in him, and I think he's got a good shot to go in that second round, maybe top 50. That'd be interesting. The last guy we haven't talked about in this yet is Alec Iomanner. I've heard we've been pronouncing it wrong, but I forget what they said it was. So, anyways, feel free to correct us if you know how. He's also kind of big. He's like 6'2". He should be able to play outside. Stanford's offense is terrible, so his numbers are not great. But you go back to not last year, but the year before, his sophomore season, they played CU. And, if you know Alec Iomanner, you probably know about this game, but it's worth mentioning again. Almost 300 yards receiving in that game against CU. A lot of it was on Travis Hunter. Not every catch, I don't believe, but a lot of it was on Hunter. So if you can go out there and ball out against one of the best players in this class, you've definitely got some skills. But he's another guy kind of like Higgins that I do think could live outside.
Yeah, and from what I'm seeing with his stats, is I believe he was probably injured his freshman season because I'm only seeing 2023 and 2024 data on ESPN. But I mean, your first year playing, you get over 1,000 yards. If that was as a freshman, that's that's being talked about nationally. Every single week. Like, look at this, freshman stud upcoming. But he did it as a second year player. But his first year on the field. So that's very impressive. And like you said, he really roasted Travis Hunter and made him look like he had 30 pounds, 40 pounds on him, which I believe he does, but he put that on display. And yeah, this season really wasn't much worse. You kind of hope to see a step forward, but he still had 6 touchdowns, same amount of touchdowns. He had one more reception. It just that the yardage was 200 fewer. 831 yards is nothing to really be disappointed in too much. I saw that the quarterback stats overall, they had 500 fewer passing yards. So yeah, I mean the passing attack took a step back, and he was a victim of that. So I think based on that production, the size, and the fact that he has a background in track, it could be a guy that runs in the low 4.4s, maybe higher. I don't know for sure with that size. I don't think he's quite the Brian Thomas Jr. athlete, but I think he could impress. Have that height, weight, speed, that speed score that you see on Player Profiler, where it's 80, 90th percentile, and I think that's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, no, I like you said, he's going to be interesting to see. And with that track background, if he tests well, he could definitely be a riser between now and the draft. A couple of big X receivers and a big slot. Pretty good tier, honestly, for tier 4.
Yeah, and when you look at Tier 5 here, we do not have that kind of size. We've got a lot of players that are more suited for potentially the slot, maybe flanker roles. We have Xavier Restrepo, Jalen Royals, Jalen Knoll, Tez Johnson, and Isaiah Bond. And I think probably the biggest name here, and there's a couple, but I think Isaiah Bond is one that people were very, very hopeful for. He was still being mocked in the first round like 2 months ago, which was just made no sense. Come on. This guy, he didn't even have, I believe, 500 receiving yards.
Yeah, he's a Texas wide receiver who's fast. That's what he's got. Which I mean, he is fast. It's probably going to lead to maybe day 2 draft capital. I wouldn't want my team to use day 2 draft capital on him, but that kind of speed is hard to teach. So
Which I pulled it up here. He had 540, so he did just surpass 500. But
just barely.
yeah, yeah, yeah. He just has elite movement skills. He's quick, not only like long speed wise, but I've heard that people just talked about how he's got really high upside as just a route runner in general because he is quick in and out of his breaks. He could be the guy who has the best 40 time at the wide receiver position. He I think it's 5A Georgia All State first place winner for the 100-meter in high school. So yeah, we know that he's got that ability. We've seen him burn deep in college before. Just when you're betting on these speed guys that don't have much production, sometimes it's just they're more valuable to the NFL because they're stretching the field, they're getting your guys open underneath. And I think he's a guy who's prone to just overrunning the coverage. I've heard a lot of discussion about how he doesn't have the feel for zone. That he's just so used to being the fastest player in the field his whole life that he just runs fast and he doesn't tempo sit in zones and just runs himself into off coverage. So I think that's something that might be fixable, but I feel like zone coverage is more of a feel thing and instincts. So I think he still has that upside, but I think that the risk is very high that he's never going to be a player that was going to be startable in fantasy. I mean, I think best ball, he's got the speed. I think he will have some big touchdowns, so I could see being a little bit more interested in best ball, but not too much more.
Yeah, I think something I was going to bring up too is if you're in a best ball league, probably not a bad guy to roster. He should at least have the opportunity to hit a couple of home runs a game. Probably not going to hit them too often, but in a best ball league, you get to take advantage of those weeks without the risk. Oh, you got more to add?
No, I was going to jump over to the next player with Xavier Restrepo. I think he's pretty opposite of Isaiah Bond. I think he's just a player that will be good in the NFL. I don't think there's a ton of risk of him flopping. I mean, he's got 2 seasons back to back with over 1,000 receiving yards. He is an older prospect. This is fifth season that he's coming out after. He's a little smaller at 5'10", but I see he's listed right around 200 pounds, so I think he's pretty compact. I think he's just gonna be good, but not great.
Yeah, I think he'll be one of those guys that you're happy to have on your NFL team, but he's not going to be startable necessarily. Next guy I want to talk about on this list, someone I at least made a case for tier four, but don't feel so strongly that we had to fight about it or anything. Just brought him up. Be Jalen Royals out of Utah State. A lot of people have really been rising on him. He's a lot of fun to watch. Broke 1,000 yards last year in his sophomore year. He is an early declare, which we like to see. This year only played 7 games, but had over 800 yards. So, but almost 40 more yards per game than last year when he did break 1,000. So definitely a great pace. Just I'm not sure. I'm assuming an injury.
Yeah, he had an injury this year.
He's at the combine, right? So it shouldn't threaten his offseason. Either way, he's a ton of fun. He's like I said, early declare, small school, which a little bit concerning, but I've seen a ton of mocks with him going in the second as well. If he ends up with that second round draft capital in a position to get some opportunity, I think he could be a lot of fun.
Like you said, within a small school, and you want to see those guys really, really like dominate the competition there. I think he was on the way to doing that though, because I mean, 7 games, 834 yards. That's pacing for 14, maybe 1,500 yards in a year. So and a lot of people really like him. You see, round two draft capital. It's just that those small school guys, the hit rate is not quite as high. But like Sky Moore was one of those guys. I don't know. I do think that he's probably the most interesting player in this tier, though. I think he could jump up to tier four potentially.
Yeah, definitely a fun player. Definitely someone to watch. I think he's now on most of our radars. All right, yeah. And the next guy I want to talk about, someone who might be a tier or two higher if the good Lord had blessed him with an extra 15 pounds on his frame. Tez Johnson out of Oregon. Guy weighed in at like I think 156 pounds, if I'm correct, for the Senior Bowl. I don't know that we've seen someone succeed at that size in the NFL. We're trending towards that more and more, so I'm not going to write him off completely because the guy can ball. He gets open. He's really good at playing receiver. I think in the right situation, he could be a good asset to an offense. I'm just not sure his frame is big enough to support a big enough role to make him fantasy relevant.
Yeah, Tez Johnson. It's so hard to buy in a guy that's 150 some pounds. It's just unheard of, and it really really scares me a lot. I mean, he's 5'9", 5'10", but he has been good. I mean, despite that size, he has been good in college. I think that there is a chance that he just runs away from guys and they can't catch him all that much, and he doesn't have to play through contact all that much. He's not going to be lined up as the X wide receiver. He's probably going to be in motion or in the slot, getting away from that physicality. And sure, there might be scenarios where you have to catch it in contested scenarios. It's not a ton, and I don't think his quarterback's going to put him in that scenario if he's not open. I don't think he's going to throw in the ball, but I think he will separate a decent amount. So it's just such a really really tough assessment here because I kind of want to buy in just based on how good he was at the Senior Bowl and putting up numbers and double digit touchdowns back to back years. The way that he looks after the catch, if you watch some of his highlights, dude, he just looks like he's a video game character that they just can't catch him. But man, that profile is just a tough one. That's why we have him here. Might have him higher if we had more confidence in that profile. But another guy, the last guy in this tier, Jalen Knoll, he's a little bit smaller as well, but not too small. He's he's not light. He measured in at 5'9" was the issue when he was listed at 5'11" before. That's a pretty big difference for a wide receiver. He is pretty compact as well, like 195, 200 pounds. He's been pretty productive. Every year he's gotten better. As a freshman, he produced 265 yards, which is that's solid for a freshman. Then he went to 572 yards, 820 in his junior year, and then nearly 1,200 yards this year. And that was alongside another wide receiver in Jaden Higgins, who I just talked about, that was putting up production. So it's a little bit harder to get production, when you're not getting as many targets. So I think that he's a good player. Honestly, he's him and Jalen Rose are right at the tip top of this tier for me. He's somebody that I've been really, really interested in. He's kind of been my wide receiver 9 or 10 there with Jalen Rose, Jack Beck. I've kind of gone back and forth with, but I got Beck higher for sure now.
Something real quick I want to do to wrap up. We kind of talked about it through the first three tiers, but just draft capital. You expect rookie draft, talking superflex, not NFL draft. Tier four guys, we think probably mostly in the second round ish,
Yeah, I'd have those. I have those guys pegged as mid seconds to late seconds.
and then tier five guys, all third rounders, unless they get good draft capital landing spots that we're not expecting.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the way I got them.
Cool. Yeah, the same for me. I just wanted to make sure we touched on that for those two. I know we did on the first three tiers, but
You want to close this out, David?
sure. Yeah. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Dino Construction Podcast. We hope this was as helpful for you as it was for us. Please remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen or view. And from all of us here at Dino Construction, until next time.